Brought to you by Dale Carnegie of Orange County. This is the 411 on the Leadership podcast, where we discuss common sense leadership practices with executives in Southern California to transform you into the leader people want to follow.
Well, good Monday morning. Excited to start off another week with the 411 on leadership. This is John Campbell, and to my right is the fabulous and stunning Mr. Steve Thomas. Good morning, Steve.
All these titles on a Monday morning. Makes a brother feel good.
Absolutely.
Part of the
Absolutely.
show.
Good to be together. Always great to sit with you. Hey, Steve, what's the information about today?
Well, we are going to be talking about the ideas we always have for the last few podcasts, but we're going to intersect inclusive leadership with servant leadership. What does that look like, especially as we're dealing with crisis situations? Look forward to the guests that we're going to be having on our podcast this morning. And so this podcast is brought to you by Sitch Radio. Hey, if you're looking into doing your own podcast, feel free to talk to our main producer, Brian. He's also been a guest with us on the show, and he's the one that is directing all the shows for Sitch Radio, all the podcasts, I should say, for Sitch Radio. Feel free to drop them a note or connect with them, sitchradio.com. Talk to my man, Brian, and he will be sure to get you started on sharing your story through your own podcast. Speaking of podcasts, John, if you are liking the content we are putting out on this podcast, please like, comment, subscribe. We are available on Facebook Live, on LinkedIn Live, also on YouTube. And then also the show is being produced and sent to Spreaker, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and other major podcasting platforms. And so please feel free to comment, like, and subscribe. Even as we're having this discussion today, we want to hear from you. We want to know your questions. We want to hear your comments, and we'll be sure to acknowledge those live on our podcast. So, John, who do we have joining us on the podcast today?
Well, we got someone that we are extremely excited to have join us. This is somebody who is known to the 411 on Leadership group and to those of Sitch Radio. They know this man. This is Todd DeVoe. Todd is the Titan HST Director of Emergency Management. He is an emergency management educator, host of the leading emergency management podcast, EM Weekly. Additionally, he hosts Business Continuity Today and Prepare, Respond, Recover podcast. Todd is a contributing author to the book Campus Crisis Management, a comprehensive guide to practitioners, and the author of many white papers and studies on emergency management. He's an active member of the International Association of Emergency Managers and has recently been elected as president of Region 9. And Todd obviously is a guy that just loves to learn. Help us welcome this morning, Mr. Todd DeVoe.
Hey, guys. Thank you so much.
Mr. President, good morning.
We are excited to have you, brother. Thanks for jumping in with us today.
Oh, it's always a pleasure to talk to you guys. And it's always a pleasure to come on the show. And, Steve, I got to tell you something. You always look dapper. You love your vest. You always have like great. I'm here in a sweatshirt and stuff, and I'm like, oh man, Steve, you look great. John, you look great too, by the way.
Whatever. I see how it is. Okay.
Well, I knew that we would be having someone of Todd's stature here, being the president. So I needed to be sure that I dressed for the occasion. So we definitely appreciate you coming on. And so, Todd, we've been talking about inclusive leadership. We've been talking, one of the things that I know that you're passionate about is servant leadership and the importance of that. But before we get into that, what are some of the things that are going on within emergency management? What are some of the core issues that emergency leaders, emergency managers are facing today?
Wow, there's a lot of struggles that are going on today. Specifically, if you take a look at the world, I mean, obviously COVID's still a thing, right? And we're still trying to navigate what that means on the front of people going back to work, into the office or not, or what does it mean on the recovery side of it? And when does that when when is recovery starting when it comes to COVID, and working with our public health leaders when it comes to this. And the other side of it too is climate change. Now, I'll tell you my official stance on climate change. Look, I don't know if it's caused by man-made issues or not. I don't know, like what the reason, what we can do to stop it. That's not my job. I'm not a scientist. I can only react to the actual science behind it, where it says, hey, our temperatures are getting hotter, and because of that, we have some more intense storms. We've seen flooding in New York City and New Jersey and Massachusetts over, due to a rainstorm that occurred, hurricane tail end of it. Things like this that we have to worry about. We have drought here on the West Coast, California. We're seeing, obviously the wildland fires are becoming more intense and longer for various different reasons. Those are some of the issues that we're dealing with. And when I say dealing with it, we have to really look at the human side of disaster, and what does it mean to have to evacuate? What does it mean with the impact on the economic side of things? What does it mean for trade? You're taking a look at on the coast of California, all these cargo ships that are sitting out there floating around. And here's the interesting thing about these cargo ships, right? That there's now a shortage of empty cargo ships, right? And what does this mean? Well, there's also a shortage of petroleum cargo ships as well, right? The fuel ships. And in England specifically, they're having a shortage in making carbon dioxide, right? So with that, like CO2 that they use in like drinks and stuff. And because of this like weird shortage, and this is how things all wrap into each other, right? Because of this weird shortage, now they're having a harder time with beer, to create the bubbles in beer, and they call them fizzy drinks, but here in the States, soda or pop, right? So it's like a really weird, other things too, but that's kind of weird. It goes to the Main Street, right? When we go from like this higher level down to Main Street, they're having a shortage of those type of things. So all this kind of wraps around COVID, it wraps around climate change, it wraps around the ability for people to do economic trade globally. So that's what those are the areas that we really research and talk about in emergency management.
Well, and Brian, one of the things that we appreciate, because, we as the common everyday individual, we don't always know what's going on. We just see the after effects of things, but it's great to know that there's someone like you and there's an organization out there that is actually strategizing and putting things into place. Talk to us a little bit about, we joked a little bit about that, you're kind of a big deal as the president of Region 9. So what is the International Association of Emergency Managers, and what does that look like?
So the International Association of Emergency Managers is truly a global organization, right? There's basically three components to it. We have IAEM USA, IAEM Canada, and IAEM Global. And Ellis Stanley, who was actually the emergency manager for Atlanta and also here in LA, great guy, a wonderful man. He heads up the IAEM Global initiative, getting out there and really working with emergency managers in other parts of the world. And we bring everybody together once a year in October at the International Association of Emergency Management Conference. This year it's in Grand Rapids, Michigan. We bring everybody together over there, and you get to learn from each other. I think that's an exciting time. But we talk about these issues, right? We talk about how we really impact. And emergency management is a really kind of this huge umbrella term, right? When you talk about it, it's like, when somebody says, what exactly is emergency management? And, producer Brian over here and I have this conversation a lot about they having that 1 minute elevator speech. Well, it's almost impossible to put into that, right? Because it has in some cases it's crisis management, right? For like say businesses, which crisis management also has like this huge umbrella. In some cases it's business continuity. Like how do you keep a business running after an event happens, whether it's a local event or a national event. Some cases it's local government, right? Which most people think about, right? Where you're doing the earthquakes or the fires or the tornadoes and stuff like this. In some places it's really getting deep into research, right? FEMA has a great research realm of where they're looking at technology and things that are coming about that can help people in crisis, right? So emergency, the IEM looks at all those pieces and we bring everybody into one area and we have these conversations. And, again, this might be boring for a lot of people, but I mean, if you think about medical journals, they're not really exciting for the average person. But we write and we put in these journals and we talk about this, and we really try to formulate plans at the global scale, at the national scale, and at the regional scale, which is the local scale, of how can we help each other out during crisis. And that's what IAEM is all about.
That's awesome. And Steve and I appreciate, because if there's anybody we want with exceptional leadership skills, it's somebody at these type of emergency situations that knows how to plan, activate, get people mobilized. And so thanks so much for coming in and sharing with us today.
Yeah, so if you're joining us online, we're talking with Todd DeVoe. Please feel free to connect with us. Shoot us a comment, shoot us a question. We want to hear from you. What questions do you have for Todd as we have him here on our podcast? So, Todd, recently we have been discussing the idea of inclusive leadership and the definition, or the broad definition that we had shared with our guests and have had those beginning discussions with, is founded on the idea that everyone feels that they're not only listened, and not only that they're listened to, but that they're valued, like creating that sense of belonging within our teams. However, one of the things that you're passionate about is this idea of servant leadership. And I find that interesting, not because that's not something you would be interested in. It's because when you talk about emergency management, crisis management, the idea of servant leadership isn't something that I guess we just say readily comes out, right? And so, we're curious to hear from you, with you and your experience with emergency management, considering inclusive leadership. Introduce this idea of servant leadership, and why is that something that you're so passionate about?
Sure. So, I mean, I understand the idea that during a crisis we have command and control, and that's important, right? And I really think when you take a look at your leadership styles, you have to be able to be fluid to go through each of those styles, right? There are times when you have to come in and drop the hammer and be like, this is what we're doing, this is how it has to happen. And in the sense of what we learned in the military, or what I learned in the military at least, is the idea of commander's intent, right? That there's an overarching goal and objective that we have, whatever that it would be, and that's the intent. And getting there is up to the lower levels, right? They're not going to tell you exactly how to get to that objective. You just have to get to that objective and make it. And so, on the civilian side, we use that concept as well, right? Incident command systems, right? It very sounds command driven from the higher level, but at the end of the day, when you are the incident commander, when you're up there, you're not necessarily getting into the weeds on how things are being done, right? You do have goals, objectives, and this is what has to happen, whether it's putting out a fire or doing a rescue or doing those type of things. But when you're getting down the technical side of things, when you're getting down to the guys into the weeds that are actually doing it, you're not telling them, okay, you need to use like a number 2 spanner wrench, right? I made that up, by the way. It doesn't exist, right?
It's like, no, I need to go. Do I need to go get me one of those? Okay.
Right. So you're not telling them to use that particular tool to do their job. They're going to figure out, they know what tool they need, and the situation that's dynamic, of what works. So that being said, what you have to do as a servant leader in those situations, and this is what I've told my team, this is what I've told everybody who's part of our leadership team with IAM Region 9. I said, my job as a leader is to open doors and kick down walls, right? If you need something, it is up to me to say yes, and to find a way to say yes, right? Now, obviously, as long as it's within moral and ethical and legal standards, right? We're not going to break the law to get things done. But at the same time, we're going to do everything we possibly can do to make sure that you have the tools and the skills and the people and the equipment, whatever you need to get the job done. That's what our job is. And so our job isn't to yell at people and say, hey, John, dig deeper, right? Our job is to say, hey, if you need that dig deeper, what tools do you need and how can I help you? Right? That's how it's good. That's how it's done. And so to allow the people down below you to be able to do the job. So yeah, you think of, you see the movies where the chief of the fire department is in charge and telling everybody what to do. Not really, because like at the end of the day, the guys that are going, the gals I'm from back east. The guys is a general term, everybody. So just right are going into the building to put the fire out. They know what they're doing. The chief is out there making sure that they're safe, making sure that they have the tools they need. And that's what I meant by that's servant leadership on the crisis.
So if I can jump in and drill down a little deeper. So how then would I love what you're saying in terms of like, as relates to us being servant leaders, is us making sure that the people that are working with us, making sure that they have all the tools necessary to get the job done, right? Making sure that they're empowered to do essentially what they do best, given their specific area. So, with that being said, how would you define inclusive leadership, and what would you say is the connection between the two based on your experiences?
Sure. So we look at things in general, emergency management and crisis response into blue sky days, gray sky days, and black sky days, right? Blue sky days is a beautiful day out, right? There's, like what we love to be, right? When the days that we want to go hang out with our family at the park or the beach or whatever, right? The gray sky days are days that things are happening that we're planning for, leaning forward, whether it is that there's a fire off in the distance or there's a storm coming our way that we're planning for. And the black sky days is obviously when the disaster is occurred, right? So there's that. And so when we really look at inclusiveness in the planning process, right, is during the blue sky days. And it really goes through all three schedules, but just to kind of get you up to speed, right? Not you particularly, Stephen Chan, but you as in like your organization. You have to take a look at what are the real issues. And I'll give you a really neat story. So there was this plan for the longest time. We would create a plan, emergency operations plan, and go through this whole process. And it's this document that everybody gets to look at. It's approved by the government, right? At the county level, local level, and we would have an annex, right? Annex are things that you think of other than, right? So what I mean by that is you have, okay, here is my major plan, and I have our fire annex. I have our earthquake annex. I have our flood annex, right? So things like you kind of delve into. And one of the annexes that we used to have, and I kind of still do, but in a different way, and I'll explain in a second, is our access and functional needs annex, right? The plan wasn't like, hey, here we go. Throughout, we weren't in the minds of the people with access and functional needs, and I see where they're coming from. As you read the plan, they weren't really mentioned at all in the plan. It was like, hey, we're going to have evacuations, we're going to have this, but it wasn't really mentioned in the main plan. It was mentioned in the annex. And like, again, I don't want to say it's an afterthought, but this kind of like, I can see where they're coming from on the idea that they felt that they were. So one of the things that we had to do is include everybody into that main plan. And so when we first started doing the planning process, again, to go over it and seeing how we can really integrate that annex into the main plan, you're sitting around and there's a bunch of able-bodied people sitting in the room, right? And so we said, hey, wait, we have to include people that have access and functional needs problems, right? Because like, how can we really like understand some of the issues? So we ended up reaching out to a couple of organizations that really have great thought leaders in that place, and people that are actually in wheelchairs or have visual impairments, that are deaf, that have these problems, and brought them on into the table and had them sitting at the table making that plan. And so we could really not just say, hey, we have this idea, I have an idea of what the problem might be of, how do we get people from the second floor to the first floor, right? Well, we actually brought them into the conversation and said, hey, how does this work? What are your problems? What do you see? What are your concerns? How do we make this work for your community? And that's the inclusiveness when it comes into emergency management. Same thing when we start talking about language barriers, right? As an English speaker only, right? Writing a message that translates well into other languages. And we're talking, I forget right off the top of my head, and I don't want to be wrong, but it's something like 30 something languages that are major languages that are spoken in Orange County alone, right? It might be more than that. So if I'm wrong, please, forgive me for being off by a few. But the idea is there's multiple languages that are spoken. So whether it's Vietnamese, Spanish, Korean, Farsi, those are the things that pop. The French, in LA County, there's a huge Russian population, alone. So how do we communicate? With them as we're writing our message? And so, and I'm going to plug Titan HST here for a second, where I work. We actually created on our app the ability to have real-time language translation, right? So that includes, so that's when you're doing those mass notification systems pushing out whatever their phone is set to, right? Whatever, say you have a Spanish speaker, like my mother-in-law, for instance, her phone is set to Spanish. The message will get to them in Spanish. Now, there's still, some issues with that we're working on, but the idea is like, now you're able to really include that population that doesn't speak English, because God forbid there's an evacuation notice and they don't understand what the message means, right? And that's the other part of it, is always thinking that portion of it and bringing those communities into the planning process during blue sky days, whether not during dark sky days or black sky.
Right.
Days.
Yeah. I really appreciate, from that leadership perspective, Todd, that talking about, we don't just strategize and say, okay, here's what we think works for those people that we're leading, and really bringing them to the table and saying, we need your input. And so many times as a leader, we default, we know what's going on. We can plan it out, but we don't always know. And a lot of times we don't know what we don't know.
Right.
And so being able to have them, and that was one of the things I know when you and I spoke earlier, Todd, was your philosophy on that is bringing them to the table so that you can get their voice. And some of those that hadn't even been included before, you had talked about them, or you had talked, through things, but you hadn't actually included them in building that discussion. And I know, Steve, you and I we say often, people support a world that they help create.
Right.
And, not only do you get to learn the things, well, maybe I planned this way, but it would be better if it was planned that way. You get their buy-in.
And it's also in their best interest as well, if you think about it, because if we're looking at serving them the best way that we can, then it's important for them that they're at the table, right? And what I loved about the example that you included, as it's not just culture, right? But when we talk about being inclusive, we're talking about generations, those that are older than us, those that are younger than us. It's those, and this is something that's hardly mentioned, which we had this conversation. I look forward to us, delving in that a little bit deeper in a future podcast. It's also disability. Nobody mentions, or hardly anyone mentions, people in those disability groups.
Right.
And it's including them and making sure that they also have a seat at the table, so that we are best able to employ that servant leadership and serve them with the tools that they need, and empower them, not only so that they could do their best work, but also it's going to be a benefit, not only just as an organization, but as we manage those crisis situations, right? As we manage those emergency situations. And I forget the stat off the top of my head. I'm trying to think about what the stat is, but just in terms of diversity fosters innovation. Why? Because you're getting thoughts from different people, which in turn, if you're getting that, we're able to also problem solve a little bit faster, as well as getting all those different trains of thought from different people. We're talking with, go ahead, Todd.
Steve, one of the things too on diversity too is like, when we're that's not just different, different cultures, different races, different sexes, those things that add into there, but also different like thought processes, right? And what I mean by that is, like, say, when you bring somebody into the room, if you have, say, 25 firefighters, for instance, writing a plan, it's all going to be fire centric, right? You got to bring people in from social services. You got to bring people in from public works. You got to bring people in from the police department. You got to bring people in from, parks and recreation. You got to bring people in from all those different areas within your organization, because otherwise you're going to have groupthink, tunnelthink, right? Because those that have brought up into that culture of that organization are going to have one set of values and thought processes. So you have to bring people in from other organizations and other departments, if you will. If you are in a business, bring people from different divisions, right? Your operations division compared to your support divisions, and bring them into the room, and also see what they're saying, because each division has its own culture, regardless if you believe it or not. But you'll see it.
Right.
Mm-hmm. So we've got a couple of comments that come in through the chat. Susmitha, thanks so much for your comments in the chat, and she mentioned such a good principle for servant leadership as a whole. For diversity is not only color, race, gender, but to remember that there are different kinds of human beings which bring different ideas to the table based on their unique experience. And Susmitha, we're 100% in agreement on that one, because of people's perspectives, because of people's experiences. It does bring a unique element that could help our teams and for our organization. So it behooves us as leaders to create that sense of belonging and to create an environment of psychological safety, so that people can come in and feel free to be their authentic selves at work, right? And also to share. You know what? Time is going by super fast, and we only have a couple minutes left. We're talking with Todd DeVoe. He is director of HST Titan Management, and so we want to ask you, Todd, as he's also, I forgot to mention,
yes, he's a big
president. Deal. He is a big deal. He is a big deal. So Todd, a little private joke. I wish we had the story to tell it. So Todd, as we are closing out this podcast, based on our discussions revolving around servant leadership and how it factors into inclusive leadership, especially in emergency situations, we have those leaders that are listening, and they're thinking, okay, well, we may not be in an emergency.
With a little technical difficulties. Can you hear us, brother?
Yeah, I can. Absolutely.
Todd, where were you, Mr. President? This was an emergency situation.
We needed your leadership. Or got the right person with us when stuff goes down.
well, let's finish this off strong, Todd. Again, we're just asking, what would you say is that one practice that you would share with leaders that are facing crises of their own, whether it's them trying to find someone to fill in some key positions or trying to navigate this business and business environment?
Speak last.
Oh,
when you go into the room with your team, let them start with the most junior person in the room, and move up. And as the leader in the room, speak last, because you will not get the truth out of people, because they want to do what you want. They want to please you. And if you go in the room and dominate, you're not going to get information from your team. And so be the last person to speak in that room, and you will get the information that you need to be a better leader.
That's great insights.
That is.
Yeah, thank you. We appreciate that, Todd. Thank you so much. Thanks for joining us, taking time with us today. It means a lot. And for those of you that are listening, there was a slight gap there as we had some technical difficulties. We're back live, but if you're watching this on a recording or listen to it, please make sure you like, subscribe, still continue to add comments, because we do go back and we check those, and we'd love to hear from you and your insights. If you've got questions for Todd, you can also reach out to Todd. We've got his contact information there for you in the show notes so that they can get a hold of you. Todd, if there's someone's trying to reach out, got some questions, whether it's on leadership, if it's on emergency management, I know you work with so many businesses here locally and around the country. How can someone get a hold of you when they've got questions?
Sure. It's pretty easy. It's my first initial last name, so T DeVoe. And you can get that at titanhst.com. That's T DeVoe at Titan, TITIN, HST.com. You can get me there, or you can also always reach out to me at Todd at emweekly.com. Either one of those will get to me, and I'd be happy to engage.
And Todd, where can they catch your podcast? Because you do a couple of different podcasts. So how can people catch you on your podcast?
Sure. Tuesday mornings at 9 a.m. right here on LinkedIn or Facebook and YouTube. You can get the Business Continuity Today show, which we kind of talk about leadership and other things like this, and really how to lead during a crisis. And then also EM Weekly, which is on Thursdays at 9 a.m. Pacific time, both of those, and as well. And that will be also on LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, and also all your podcast players.
Awesome. And I would say too, just as a plug as well, check out Todd's podcast, Never Forget 911. That particular one resonated with me, Todd, only because I was there during 9/11. And so I thought that was just a very poignant podcast you released. So it's Never Forget. That's the title of the episode of that podcast, which I believe that you could still connect to and watch. So thank you so much for doing that. Todd, thanks so much, Mr. President, for having you on the show. I'm telling you, man, we know that we've reached the pinnacle of our podcast career, when we've got Todd who joins us on the show, because he's a Titan and he's a big deal.
He is a big deal.
Thanks so much, everyone, for joining us. Listen, have a great week. And remember, managers light a fire under people while leaders light a fire in people. Have a great week.